Hello, it is the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. It is Tuesday, the 1st of December. I guess it is Tuesday, isn't it? John is not here.
Tuesday, yep.
Where is John?
I don't know. Is he overseas?
He likely is overseas. We are trying a different laptop for Damien right now. He is on an X1.
Yeah.
Some CPU issues on that little surface there. Not sure what's going on. May need to repave it. Too many stickers, probably.
Yeah, probably.
Oh, is Fowler going to come and visit?
No, Fowler had food poisoning.
Oh.
So he didn't come in yesterday after the long weekend and claimed he had food poisoning. So I am going to guess, and he wasn't online. I think he answered like one email I saw from his phone yesterday. So he like legit was sick.
Oh wow! So it's actual food poisoning and not a mental health day.
That's what it sounded like.
Yikes.
So yeah.
Should have gone to Qdoba instead of Chipotle.
So just out of interest, we're talking about the CPU on the Surface. I've just come back over to it. I had tried running Hangouts in IE. And so I just came over. IE is long closed, but the Hangouts plugin process is still reporting that it's using 40% CPU. So, you know.
Clearly, that's a Hangouts problem. And
clearly something is, I mean, or it could be my frozen task manager just lying to me. So, you know, whatever.
Okay. Well, that's all right.
That's all right.
Cool. So it is December. What are we working on? Are we all going on vacation for a month?
So,
doing nothing?
Oh, geez, mate. We've got so much work to do. So we talked last week about the unfortunate thing that was RC1 Update 1. That is now out. So we pushed that live last night or very late yesterday. If you go to get.asp.net now and you hit the big green button for install ASP.NET 5 RC, it no longer takes you to the instructions, which is what it did because of the bugs we had in the installer. It now just downloads the installer, and that's the new one. So we've released RC1 Update 1 to refresh people's memories. That was simply a fix to the installer itself for Windows. So that only affected Windows users. It was a couple of patches in the DNX to do with publishing and runtime assembly resolution when you were doing cross-plat stuff. So there was a couple of bugs that were affecting, for example, I want to run SQL client, but I'm on Linux. And there were some bugs that were preventing us from loading the right assembly. So you would get a assembly not found exception. And then there were some bugs associated with publishing with those types of packages as well, where you had specific assemblies that were for specific platforms, and we weren't honoring those correctly, and they were found very late, unfortunately. But they're now fixed. So if you install that, you can just install it over the top of RC1, or you can go straight from beta rate to RC1 Update 1. Either thing will work. And if you're using DNVM, you can now do an update from DNVM, or an upgrade, I should say, and you'll get the latest version from NuGet. So that's all live and ready to go. Please let us know if you find any other issues. So that's good.
Cool. I was impressed with the onboarding experience for like a new person. Like, I know we're all beta and we're all frustrated sometimes because we're wondering what build to get and this kind of stuff. But I set up a new machine yesterday. I went to visualstudio.com/free, downloaded community, went file new project, saw that it was saying go get RC1, said okay, got RC1, next, finish.
Nice.
VS, and I was running all up to date and feeling very positive.
That's great.
Yeah, it was very nice onboarding experience. I think it's nicer for new people sometimes than it is for those of us that are doing the daily build kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's true of a lot of things, whether you're using preview Office bits or preview Visual Studio bits or even preview Windows bits. I think that's part and parcel for that. You know, that deal is that if you're using preview bits, sometimes there'll be a bit of pain.
Yep.
Yeah, as much as we don't want there to be.
Indeed.
Yeah. So we're working on a lot. So obviously we're working on tracking to our second RC, as we've talked about. RC2 will probably be around February. I don't know when, maybe mid-February. Let's just call it mid-February because it's a safe bet in the middle. And the big focus on RC2 is the replat on top of the .NET CLI. So DNX and DNU will cease to exist, and they will be long distant memories, and we'll all be using .NET at the command line, DOTNET, .NET Compile and .NET Run and .NET Pack and .NET Publish. And so that'll all be done. The Visual Studio tooling obviously will be rebuilt on top of that as well. And the other goal for RC2 is to be finished, as in RC2 will be sort of a shutdown in terms of work that we do on the product, and the release after that will be RTM. And so once we sort of shut down for RC2, our goal is that we're finished, and that the only things that we'll be fixing between RC2 and RTM are the most egregious, bugs.
Now,
so
we talked a little bit about how RC, it's weird to change stuff between an RC and an RC, but we've also got this Go Live license.
Yep.
Changing the DNX, the .NET kind of driver stuff, is that going to change the people who are out there like in production now? Because we've encouraged everyone go live. Mm-hmm. Is the upgrade process going to be a complicated one?
Hopefully not. So our goal was to try and ensure that apps themselves will be very minimally impacted. And so your actual application code and files will be very minimally impacted. So I think you'll have to, the best case scenario is you'll have to make a very small change to the project JSON file, and that will be it. From the command line point of view, obviously, if you have scripts or anything that runs DNX blah or DNU blah right now, they will change to be calling .NET blah, and the acquisition of getting a DNX will be a little different because you'll be downloading a .NET package instead of the DNX installer or whatever it is. But that's really it. Other than that, we hope there won't be much impact. It'll just be a nicer command line experience that's kind of unified for all .NET stuff.
Cool. So it's fair to say that the runtime aspect of things, the surface area of the APIs and stuff, are 99.9% baked.
That's the goal. That is the goal. So there's still a couple little things, in odd places that'll be moving around slightly as a result of performance investigations we've done, or future planning, like some stuff that we're not going to get to in time, but we need to make allowances in the API that we can make those changes in the future. So there will be a couple little things like that, but I don't expect them to touch mainline apps at all if we can help it.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's kind of our scope for RC2. So we're going to be, obviously that's not that far away, right? So we're already in December. This is a holiday season, so people will be away. So we'll have December and January full steam ahead, and then we'll be shipping in February, and then that'll be kind of it until we ship the RTM. As I said, the focus between RC2 and RTM is just going to be really very egregious problems and polishing acquisition and things that really don't impact the stability in any way at all.
I was noticing David seems to be very excited about perf right now, and he's kind of randomly tweeting like, we're hitting 800,000. Is perf, what's perf look like? Is it linear, or are you having moments where someone just has an epiphany in the hallway and then you run and change some code and it gets 10% faster?
No, so most of it right now, the biggest gains we've had, so we've seen some big jumps in the last few weeks. We went, like, I think people who watching me on Twitter will see that we broke 400, and then we did like 450, and then we bumped up against 500,000, and then I said, right, now let's double it, because I want to really get to 1 million. 1 million is like a nice milestone to get to on our rig. And then Ben in the community, the same guy I talk about all the time, is doing a lot of our performance work. He noticed that our next biggest gain was going to be in reducing allocations in order to relieve GC pressure, garbage collection pressure, which obviously is always a concern when building high frequency, very high performance managed code. And so he's gone on a real hell-bent sort of bender to remove allocations in the Kestrel web server and in the core HTTP abstractions and implementations. And we saw that jump from, like I said, the high 400s bouncing off 500. We're now comfortably about 730. And that happened in the space of about 2 weeks. And that was almost completely due to just reducing allocations. Wow. So that's great. And we even had, some of those things involve doing things lazily, so that if you don't use a feature, you don't allocate any memory for it during a request, which is particularly important in benchmarks, because a lot of the time in benchmarks, you're benchmarking a very particular scenario, which doesn't use a lot of the stack. And so that was, and so that's good. But also remember, for people who might be going, oh, well, that's just a benchmark. One of the tenets of ASP.NET 5, one of the traits we were trying to go for was this pay-as-you-play model, because that was one of the issues with System Web and previous versions of ASP.NET, is that they were very feature-rich, but you kind of paid for all those features even if you weren't using them. And so we've done some work to ensure that we lazily allocate things, that we don't double allocate things, that we can reuse objects if they were allocated but not used. That's especially, again, beneficial in benchmarks, where you make an HTTP connection from the client that's driving the load, and then you reuse that connection using HTTP Keep Alive and run many millions of requests over that one connection. Some objects' lifetimes are attached to the underlying TCP connection, and some are attached to the request. And if even those things that are attached to the request, there's a potential to look at those and say, well, for the lifetime of the underlying connection, this object that I use within the scope of a request could very likely just be reused for every single request because it's really attached to the connection. And so a lot of those things just come out when you start looking at allocations with a very, under a magnifying glass. And then some of the things are like APIs in .NET. And so we're looking at how we're calling things, some of the underlying intrinsics that drive asynchrony, like tasks and cancellation tokens. And we're looking at how they allocate. And we're either optimizing how we use those APIs, or in some cases even filing bugs on the .NET repo on GitHub with data, telling them, look, when we're doing 6 million requests per second, using this particular data structure that's critical for asynchrony becomes a memory problem. And so can we look at perhaps doing something about that? And sometimes that results in us changing how we use the API. Other times it results in us doing things lazily, like I talked about, so you don't pay for it unless you have to use it. And other times it may actually result in a change to a .NET object itself. So that's going on. It's great.
Is it challenging that there's kind of two orgs, that there's like the ASP.NET team doing perf right now, and then the core CLR team working on cross-platform and things like that? Like, if you
I wouldn't say
this is really important, we need to get to 2 million or whatever. And
yeah, I wouldn't say it's challenging. Like, I will say that the desire to have good benchmark results for the new stack is understood and agreed upon right up to the highest levels, and so that helps. It's not just like me or David or Scott Hunter who's saying we need to do this. Like, I've been on this boat for a while now, but we have got that aspect of what we're trying to do sort of escalated and understood at the highest levels, that benchmarks have their place and it's important, and there's a lot of good developer mindshare that comes out of good performance. And on that topic, actually, I mean, one of the very common rebuttals to when we talk about benchmark numbers is that, oh, well, that's not real world performance. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's like, well, that is true, because benchmarks are not real world. That's why they're different. But we benchmark more than one scenario. And while we're focusing very intently on this plain text scenario that is designed specifically to exercise just the HTTP efficiency of your web stack, which, let's face it, is what everything is hinges on ultimately, just by focusing on that benchmark, we're seeing improvements in the other benchmark scenarios that are more real world. So, for example, the JSON benchmark, which doesn't do pipelining, so you're not sending multiple requests outstanding, you're sending a request and then waiting for a response and then sending another request. That's seeing also an uptick in its throughput as we make improvements to the underlying HTTP and underlying abstractions, because it all ultimately hinges on how good and efficient our underlying stack is. So there is a flow-on and sort of ripple effect from focusing on benchmarks. We also have the database, some of the database scenarios now. So we have the single query benchmark, the multiple queries benchmark, and we have the fortunes benchmark in there. And as of last night, I updated the results spreadsheet in the repo, the benchmarks repo, with the results of all those benchmarks. And we have implementations for the database benchmarks using raw ADO.NET, Entity Framework 7, and Dapper. And Dapper is a very popular micro ORM built by the Stack Exchange team, the Stack Overflow team. And so we have those three implementations, and I'm open to adding others if people want to add them, and running those results and seeing the results. So people can look at the spreadsheet and look at the results of those. I haven't run them on Linux yet. That's one of my things I have to do in the next couple of days. I've only got the results for Windows right now, but look to see me add those in the next couple of days as well.
Cool. Let's do some questions.
Okay.
For RC1 Update 1, Do all references still have the same name, RC1-final?
So the only thing, we didn't rev everything. We didn't rev all the packages. The only things that changed were the things that were broken. And so the things that were broken were the Windows installer and the parts of the DNX itself, specifically the parts of DNX that are to do with determining what assembly to use out of a given package based on what runtime you're running on, what operating system. And so we only patched those versions and incremented the versions of those things. So there is not a new version of MVC, there's not a new version of HTTP abstractions, et cetera, et cetera. So they will stay the same version as they were.
I'm being told on Twitter that my voice is low. Is that better?
Yes, that's much better. And I was echoing as well. So that sounds better.
You should have told me.
Sorry.
All right. Sorry about that, folks.
I feel a slap.
For a machine that has Visual Studio 2015 RTM installed, does installing Update 1 install RC1 if it has not been installed separately? I can answer that.
Great question.
It is a policy to not ship beta products in updates. So Update 1 is an RTM update to a released product. It's an update to a released product. So instead what we do is we have a little icon that advertises, and I say advertises in air quotes, RC1. So the experience is you go file a new project looking for ASP.NET previews. All the released stuff is there, but then there's a thing that says install RC1. You double click on it. It bounces you off to what they call a Go link, which is like a Bitly, Microsoft Bitly, that downloads the update. So it's there's a bit of a little dance that you have to do, but it doesn't take long, and then you're up to date.
So that's one of the reasons we did that. The other one was also just because the schedules didn't align. So we couldn't get our RC1 done in time to ship in the update 1 of Visual Studio because they ship on different schedules and lock down different times. And so we decided to do it the way that we did it. So I have them all installed. So you can install them in any order. It doesn't matter. We also released the new Azure SDK yesterday. So there was a bunch of stuff that got released. There was Visual Studio Update 1. There was the Azure SDK. I think it's 2.8.1. Is that what was released yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
And there was ASP.NET 5 RC1 Update 1. I apologize. It is confusing, but there's a lot of different teams. It's not just you install Visual Studio and get everything anymore. People ship on their own cycles. And we reuse the same names for things because what else are we going to call it other than Update 1?
Hopefully we just pretend it didn't happen. We move forward. Once RC2 comes out, we never make that mistake again.
Hopefully. So yes, there were 3 things that released yesterday that you will probably get alerts to in Visual Studio and or that you'll want to go off and install by yourself. And I've installed them on like 4 machines now and I haven't had any issues. So fingers crossed it looks like a good stable release yesterday.
All right. What is the roadmap for WebSockets? Is there a plan to support WebSocket handlers? I'm using the old Microsoft.Web WebSockets library from Katana, or did I miss some NuGet package?
So WebSockets was just one of those things that got cut. It was on the chopping block when we had to start really looking at shutting down towards our RTM and looking at all the other work we had to do that wasn't feature work, like the performance testing work, the stress testing, the stability work, the release work. And WebSockets just didn't make the cut. So there is code that you can compile. There is a WebSockets repository up on the GitHub ASP.NET that is ASP.NET 5 compatible. And if you want to compile that yourself and use it, you can do that. A WebSockets middleware and a WebSockets API. Glimpse, I believe, is doing that because Glimpse uses WebSockets, and so they're shipping that in the box with themselves. But we will come back around, obviously, and finish that work once we've finished RTM, just like we'll go back and then we'll do Signaler 3 as well once we get RTM out the door.
All right, cool. And actually, I'm going to bring up your, while we do another question, I'm going to bring up your stake slide and talk about the different levels of kind of like support, because I think that would be a good example.
Yep.
Go ahead. You want to pick a particular question?
Yeah, I've got a PR that enables hosting in a Windows service with 0 code from the user. The user just creates a command in Project JSON and points to the package. How can I ensure my PR gets in the code base? So that's cool.
There's a couple things there, though. There's like the community aspect of that question, and then there's the technical aspect.
So technically, commands in Project JSON are going away. So as one of the moves to the .NET CLI, the commanding infrastructure that we built into DNX is going away. That will not have a home because it just doesn't really fit with the overarching way of how .NET works as a generic hosting system. And frankly, we actually found some issues with how the commanding stuff worked. The commanding stuff worked well if you just used it in the scope of our sort of ASP.NET app models, but it wasn't perfect when you started to try and do things that traditionally you could do in .NET console apps. And so it was never really a perfect sort of system. And so if your PR relies on that command feature, it's not going to get accepted because that feature is practically dead. But the idea of being able to host as a Windows service with zero code is nice. We have a community member who did a couple of blog posts on how to get a DNX app running as a Windows service. That work will pretty much just carry over when we move to the .NET CLI. Actually, it should just be simpler. Obviously, that doesn't work with .NET Core. It does require that you use the .NET framework because it relies on the service-based class, which is Windows specific, and hence is only in the .NET framework and not on .NET Core. If you would like service-based to be available on .NET Core, perhaps as a package, then you should log an issue on the .NET Core FX repo to that effect. Because I know, obviously a lot of people do like the ability to run a console app, a .NET console app, as a Windows service. And it is a scenario that I care about, but currently we are delivering that scenario by supporting .NET Framework. Right? So you'll be able to write a modern .NET app that runs ASP.NET 5, self-hosted, target .NET Framework instead of .NET Core, and you'll be able to run that in a Windows service that way.
All right.
Oh, I'm the same guy that wrote the blog post about hosting Windows services. Excellent. Well, there you go. So I hope I answered your questions. And apologies that particular commanding feature is going away, but it's going away for the reasons I mentioned.
Okay. Has anyone thought about having DNVM select the runtime from the project.json in the current directory?
It does support that, actually. So DNVM does have a command that you can use to run an app based on, like, in a current folder based on the details in the project.json and the global JSON. You can also run an app and just give it an alias to run that app as directly without having to switch to that particular DNX for that session. So I believe that's already supported by DNVM. And if it's not, you can log an issue on the DNVM repo, but DNVM is another one of those things that we're still figuring out how it fits into this new .NET world. Because whereas DNX was a monolith, it was a package that included a set of tools, a runtime, a CLR host, and a bunch of libraries. That is the definition of a monolith. It's a huge thing that has everything. The .NET CLI world is broken apart into three things. It's really a set of tools. That's the .NET driver, the compiler, etc. It's a runtime host and a runtime. So it's a piece of native code that can boot .NET Core runtime. And it's a set of .NET libraries, what we're calling the .NET Standard library. Basically, it's the new BCL, the .NET Core BCL. There are those three things which you may acquire as a unit by apt-get.net or downloading a PKG on Mac or an MSI on Windows, but they're actually three independent things that will very likely be versioned independently after you initially acquire them. And so we still haven't really figured out how a tool like DNVM, that lets you switch between different runtimes and tool chains, fits in the new .NET CLI world. We will figure that out within the next month, and then you'll be the first to know.
Is there an issue on GitHub or a place that's being discussed?
Yeah, on the .NET repo. So /.NET/CLI is where all that, if people want to keep their finger on the pulse with that, that's where all that work is happening.
All right, cool. Done. Select done. Any plans to develop MySQL or Oracle database providers?
So my current understanding of the way we do that is that Microsoft doesn't build those. We haven't built those since .NET 1.1. If I think back to my .NET history, Microsoft built the first Oracle ADO.NET provider in the .NET 1 timeframe, and then come ADO.NET in .NET 2, Oracle started building that provider. We only build the SQL Server provider. The MySQL provider, I think, is built by the MySQL community. In fact, there was a bunch of Twitter action about that last week, as it turned out that the MySQL.NET provider doesn't have proper async support, and so there was a bit of a blow up about that. That I don't know of any plans to change that, and frankly, I don't think that would happen. That's something that we would strongly. Obviously, I imagine Oracle will continue to own the .NET database provider, which is extremely good from my history of using it. And for MySQL, I don't have any personal experience, but I imagine it'll continue to get developed the way it does. If you want to help out with that, I don't think the Oracle one is open source. I don't know. I don't know if you could help. The MySQL one is open source as far as I understand. So.
All right. Any plans to push the metaprogramming stuff down to Roslyn, the stuff that's in Hello World metaprogramming?
Yeah, so they're talking about the compile module stuff. The intent is that stuff will go away because that was a DNX feature, and the intent is to do it properly down in the Roslyn compiler. I just don't have a timeline for that. So I know Jared, who leads the compiler team, has been talking a little bit about that on Twitter and on GitHub. They have some ideas that they could add to Roslyn to better formalize a metaprogramming model in the compiler itself, possibly even introducing new C# and VB keywords that let you interact with pre-compile modules at compile time via way of keywords as well as via way of writing pre-compile modules. So that is where that stands currently. No firm plans as to when, but it is being thought about.
What is the story with Mono?
The story with Mono is what it has been all along. We run on Mono. So we don't support running on Mono. That is, you can't call us and get support for Mono. Like there is no paid support for running any of our stuff on Mono, including the DNX and ASP.NET 5 stuff. The advantage we get from Mono, I mean, and when you bring up your steak analogy, this will be a good one. Mono, we want to continue to have implementation for, because Mono runs in a whole bunch of places that we don't have any plans to run on in the near future. And so if you want to be able to use ASP.NET 5 and .NET on devices and in places that we don't currently have supported runtimes for, Mono is a great answer for that, because they've done an awful lot of work to make it work in wonderful places. So if you find bugs in running ASP.NET 5 or .NET stuff on Mono, you should log them against us and or against Mono so that they can get fixed, because we will investigate them and we will do our best effort to get them fixed. But our supported cross-platform stack is .NET Core. So there is collaboration going on. We talked to Miguel a lot. Obviously, the .NET Standard library and the .NET Platform Standard, or I think that's what we call it now, .NET Platform Standard, basically the next iteration of the concept of portable .NET assemblies. We've been talking to Miguel about that quite a lot, because we all share common desires there about making it easy for people to write .NET code that runs in a lot of places. But when in terms of what's supported and what we fix and who you can call for support and those type of things, we love Mono because it lets us run in lots of places. Doesn't mean that you can call us and get support on those things if they go wrong.
Here's a follow-up here. Joel Carter says, for the person asking about an ADO.NET provider, Oracle has a managed data access client on NuGet. It works on .NET Framework 4.5.1. Not sure if it works on Core CLR. Very likely doesn't, but worth looking at. Yeah,
definitely. And if they have, I don't know, one thing you can always do with those, if you want to understand like how much work would it be to port to .NET Core, if they have a version that works on Silverlight or a version that works against a portable class library profile, a PCL profile, that means they've already done most of the work that will be required to move it to .NET Core.
Okay. We've been having a number of issues with references to class libraries 4.5.1 in the same solution. Well, a number of issues. What issues?
Yeah, without more data, I really can't.
Yeah, having a number of issues and then saying, is this a known issue? We don't know. Give us more details.
Yeah, log an issue on the tooling repo on GitHub. If it's to do with ASP.NET 5, log an issue on the tooling repo, ASP.NET/tooling.
Why are basic tasks, copy, clean, min, and things like that being done with Gulp instead of plain NPM scripts? Plain NPM script.
So NPM has a concept of scripts that you can run at various points. I think I haven't used them extensively, but I think you can attach them to various NPM events, and you can also launch them via NPM. So you can say, like, please run this script. They don't allow composition. They're not a task runner. They're really just very basic, please run this script at this point in time. And so we did this via Gulp because that's what the rest of the web development community seems to be doing for client build manager type stuff. And we didn't want, the last thing we want is for you to have to be able to say, okay, you can do very basic things like copy, clean, and min with NPM scripts when they don't interact with each other. But as soon as you want to do anything more complicated, you're going to have to move all that into a Gulp file and add Gulp and all that type of stuff. We felt it was easy. I guess.
It would be weird to ship the file new project with a really complicated example. But at the same time, if you can't build on top of plain NPM scripts in a proper, most people go to production with Gulp.
That's what we've seen. Like, I could be wrong, but I just haven't seen a big body of projects and people using plain NPM scripts for this type of stuff. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just that all the feedback that we got and what we saw in the community was people were using Grunt and Gulp. So that's the first time I've heard this, and we are where we are at in the project. So
cool. How does Core CLR check the validity of an SSL certificate when processing requests with HTTP client on Linux and Mac?
I'm gonna guess. I have no idea. My understanding is the SSL support in .NET Core on Linux and Mac uses OpenSSL. So it actually relies on the very ubiquitous OpenSSL native library, and that we essentially p-invoke into OpenSSL for all of the standard SSL cert or X509 cert APIs. Specifically when it comes to HTTP client, I'm not sure. I know that the HTTP client for Linux and Mac, I think it uses libcurl, which is another native library that is a native HTTP library that runs cross-platform. And I believe the HTTP client for Linux and Mac from .NET uses libcurl. I don't know whether libcurl includes the SSL part or whether they have to shell out to OpenSSL. That question is best asked over on the .NET repo, .NET/CoreFX on GitHub, to get a definitive answer on that.
Cool. Any issues with TFS source control? When I check the solution in, the Bower JSON, Bower RC, and project JSON is not checked in. That sounds like it's like the equivalent of a TFS git ignore. It's being ignored. It's been marked somewhere as being.
Yeah, that's supposed to be all correct by default. So it is thought about, like the tooling team here thinks about every file that we add to the template. We think about whether it should be marked for inclusion in source control, because that's something you can control at the project level in Visual Studio. And if it's not doing the right thing, then that's probably a bug or something environmental in your system that's preventing that. So again, log an issue on the tooling repo with details, and we can get that looked at.
Yeah. Is the new Razor stuff going to be used standalone for templating out of ASP.NET? Like the gentleman is using Razor engine externally, so for Razor as template engine.
Yes, that still works. So the Razor package, Razor version 4, which is the version in ASP.NET 5, that package is compiled to run on plain old .NET, as well as the DNX derivatives in ASP.NET 5. So you can use the Razor engine just like you have been previously. There are some changes, like we've changed some stuff as a result of doing the stuff in MVC. There's knowledge of things like tag helpers. There's now runtime components that weren't there before. We've removed some things from the core engine because we've been able to implement them at a higher layer. So we've got some better layering in places now. But yes, you should be able to use it.
It appears that there was a community PR for getting client certificates into Kestrel. It was accepted and merged. So when does that appear for us?
So you can start using that. Again, this is great when you eventually show this stake thing. You can get that in our dev feed. So we have a MyGet feed. We have a number of MyGet feeds, but the one that you should be using, we have a MyGet feed that essentially represents what is currently in GitHub after it has been successfully tested together via our automated testing facility and signed and then pushed to this feed. So that is all the details of how to get packages from that feed are up on the docs. It's the ASP.NET vNext feed on MyGet. And you can get the very latest features from getting packages from that feed. If that feed is still not enough for you, you can always build from source. So you can always clone the repo and then use the global JSON trick to point your project at where you cloned the Kestrel repo in this case, and then you can actually build Kestrel yourself from source directly after you've cloned it from GitHub and use that in your project fairly painlessly. The only warning there is that as soon as you start using one project from source, you may find you have to start using a whole bunch of other projects from source, because obviously we sometimes break things that have rippling effects across more than one repo. And so if you're using 90% of the package, 90% of ASP.NET from packages and 10% from projects on GitHub, you will very likely end up with some incompatibilities because we've moved stuff around.
Any plans porting an LDAP client over to .NET Core? That's a little obscure.
Yeah, none that I know of. I mean, LDAP is pretty ubiquitous in the sort of enterprise computing world, and especially for doing sort of heterogeneous directory service, type stuff. I used LDAP a lot in government back when I was doing.
I did too, but it's been a while. I guess I just
and like if you're a Windows shop, you tend to just use directory services. But that's not in .NET Core. So I mean, this is a pretty valid question. Like if I want to query an LDAP server from .NET Core, how do I do it? That's a great question.
Today you don't, it sounds like. So that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah,
is it gonna? And we need to. And here's a good question. How do we, as Microsoft, who prioritizes stuff, like we could always say, well, you can do it. It's open source, but it's a kind of a enterprisey thing that needs to be done. How do we prioritize stuff like that?
That's a very complicated question.
I know some of the answers. Like, I mean, big companies ask, right? If you work for Big Co, you'll ask us, and you'll say, "Hey, we here at Big Co feel that this is a huge problem. So, email us, email our boss, email us with a focused and clear. We can't go live on .NET Core without X because of these things, and then we prioritize the work."
Yep, and obviously log issues on the GitHub repo. Again, .NET/CoreFX. If there's not already a issue logged that covers the system, I think it's system.directory services namespace that has all the LDAP stuff in it in the full framework. And if that API set is deemed to be too Windows specific, like too Active Directory specific, then perhaps we need a new LDAP .NET Core API that is to spec. I don't know. I'm just like talking off cuff. I have no idea. But people should log issues on the GitHub repo.
All right. Any show-stopping bugs that need to be fixed before RC2?
No, not that I'm aware of. Not show-stopping. There are bugs, obviously. But if they were show-stopping, then we would have fixed them in RC1. Like the reason we didn't update 1 is because we had some show-stopping bugs that affected things like deployment and the ability to run on Linux, which was a show-stopping bug. So we fixed those. I'm not aware of any. I'm sure they'll come up. I'm sure people, as they use RC1, will report issues in production, or with larger and larger apps as more and more people use it, and then we will fix those for RC2. But I'm not aware of any off the top of my head right now.
All right. How will the new HTTP platform handler and Kestrel hosting scenario work with ASP.NET's app suspend feature?
Wow, that is a great question, and the answer is it won't. So because
all right, good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. So that feature in ASP.NET Old relied specifically on a support in IIS to tell us that IIS was ready to suspend us. And then we called APIs down low in the CLR because we had native code in IIS that booted the CLR because it was hosted in process. That was in Web Engine 4. That could call an API from native code that the thing that actually booted the CLR could say, hey, I know you're running now, but can you just pause yourself? And I will tell you when to wake up again. Now that we're using the out-of-process hosting model, just like we do for Java and Ruby and Node and those type of things in IIS, we haven't really given much thought to how that would work in that model. And really the benefit of doing that previously was that there are times when ASP.NET applications were expensive to boot. And so when they became idle, that is, they weren't currently serving any requests, it was cheaper to pause them, which basically just means take all the memory that's currently mapped into physical RAM and page it out to the hard drive. The process is still there, the memory is still accounted for in the global use of memory, but it's all on a hard drive now rather than being in RAM. And then when the next request comes in for that app, all they have to do is page that memory back into physical RAM, or unpage it, and then it would spin up, and that would be much faster than having to reboot the entire application again. Particularly useful when you're hosting lots and lots and lots and lots of applications on one server, like you're a hosting provider like Azure, because now you can keep applications warmer than they otherwise would have been when they're idle for the same amount of hardware. Like, you don't have to have more RAM to keep apps running. And then when the app does start up, you're not burning a whole bunch of compute, because you have to boot the application, which is much more CPU intensive than just paging a bunch of stuff back out of RAM. Haven't given a lot of thought to how that works in the new model. I imagine it'll come up again at some point, or it may not. Maybe RAM's the point that it's not, it's not as much of a problem as it was before in the cloud. I just haven't heard that feedback yet. So the short answer is it doesn't work. The long answer is that's something we'll probably have to think about at some point, and then we'll get back to it.
Why is it possible to execute the app with IIS Express and VS, but there's no associated command in the project.json? We have like a web and we have Kestrel. Why isn't there an IIS command?
Because we have Visual Studio tooling that understands IIS Express. And so the tooling in Visual Studio that understands how to launch an ASP.NET 5 application has special knowledge of IIS Express, because of the way it attaches with the debugger and blah, 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 a whole bunch of things. And so we create a launch profile for IIS Express, even though there isn't a command defined in the project.json for IIS Express. IIS Express can be launched from the console, from the command line, but it requires that you have IIS Express. Like, you have to install IIS Express. It doesn't get installed with the app. It gets installed into the user folder, or it's in program files, and it has a user profile set of config. So configuring it as a command is, it's possible, but it doesn't really line up, because commands generally launch DNX. In fact, they always launch DNX. So you can't, launching DNX first and then launching IIS Express is the wrong way around. You have to launch IIS Express and then have it launch DNX. And so you can't really put IIS Express in a command in the project.json file. Someone else has to launch IIS Express with IIS Express configured with the HTTP platform module, so that the HTTP platform module can launch DNX.
Okay, so let me ask this, and this is a dumb question, so just lower your expectations now.
Okay, lowered.
Let's say I wanted to run Apache on Windows and have it call, and have it run an ASP. I'm just going to say have it run an ASP.NET app.
Okay.
Right now we have IIS using the HTTP platform handler to fire up what?
DNX.
DNX, not Kestrel.
So Kestrel isn't a process, right? Kestrel is just a bit of code that runs in your app. Right,
exactly. So if we were going to build that, would we make an Apache command in project.json? We wouldn't. We need to Apache. Someone else fires up Apache.
Correct. That's a great analogy. So there are two ways you could do that in Apache, just like IIS. You could build an Apache module that hosts it in process in Apache, or you could use a standard Apache reverse proxy module that also supports process activation, just like the HTTP platform handler does. And then Apache, or that module, could launch your process when it needs to, when a request comes in, and then manage the lifetime. But you're absolutely correct. It all comes down to who owns the process that is then going to launch the app that your process runs in. And when you're running an IIS owns that process. Or in the case of Visual Studio launches IIS Express, and then the IIS Express process launches DNX. And that has to happen in that order, which is why it works that way.
All right, cool. I'm glad that my analogy did not suck. Final question, then we do have to go.
Yep.
Route values from the request do not seem to be taken into account when using link tag helpers like ActionLink and URL.action. By design. In previous versions, I didn't have to pass them manually, if I remember correctly.
They should work exactly as they did in previous versions, is my...
So that would be, if you are seeing that, in fact, then that would be a bug, and you should file that an issue with a little repro. If you can make a little tiny Hello World app that does exactly what you're saying is wrong, that's how you get attention. So
it's either that, or there was a design choice made that I'm not privy to, and we changed it on purpose, but I'm just not aware. So,
and either way, make an
issue on the MVC repo, and with the details of what used to work in MVC5 and doesn't work now, and then someone from that team will answer that directly with more knowledge of it than I have.
And the TFS person came back and they said that they tried it again and now it's resolved.
Yep.
So false alarm.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Magical.
Magical.
So before we go,
Hmm? Show and tell. You got something to show me? Ba ba ba. Look at that.
bum, 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 bum.
Can I ask you a favor?
You may.
Can you try running Google Hangouts on that? Can we do a Google Hangout, you and I, at some point, like now? And we should
Because
see
you're wondering
if,
about. Well, maybe I can
Yes.
join. Let me see if I can join this one.
Okay, I want to see how fast it is.
Okay.
Because
So-
I'm kind of bummed
So
that
check this out. Check this out. It logs in because it saw me. And
Yeah.
the part that kind of bugged me, like I thought it was a bug,
Yeah.
is it says I went like this. This is how I thought I was supposed to log into Windows. So I'm sitting there like, why is it not logging me in?
Yeah.
And then it says turn your head left and right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why?
It's like 3D.
Because it wants to prove that you're 3D. It wants to make sure that someone didn't take a picture of your face after they kidnapped you and then tried to log into your computer. So now I have to look at my computer and I go, and that's how you log in. So I'm trying to figure out, like, are there other ways? Can I go like this, or how do you log into your computer? So now it's a little, hey, how's it going, computer?
How's it going?
Pretty cool.
So tell me the specs. Come on, I need to know the specs.
This is the i7 512, 16 gigs of RAM.
Oh, beautiful.
And what's cool about this, and I'm going to do a blog post, is I've been I wanted to get a machine that I could really run anything on. Like this, you and I, this is important. This is not the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up anymore. This is Damien and Scott have been trying to get the ultimate laptop.
Yes.
For years. And I wanted to be able to, like, run Ubuntu, right? So right now I'm going to fire up, Ubuntu. Yep. And then I've also put on a thing called Kitematic, which is a Docker thing. So I'm running Docker VMs and all that kind of stuff. So I just double tapped. I'm bringing up Ubuntu, and there it is. Like, that's how fast it started up a brand new, fresh Ubuntu machine. And because it's got 16 gigs of RAM, I gave the Ubuntu machine 2 gigs of RAM, which I think is a reasonable amount. And I could have given it 4 and would have been totally fine with it.
That is nice.
So, a couple of things, though. It's heavier on the top here.
I know, it's three. Well, the whole thing is 3.5 pounds.
Unacceptable.
And I had convinced myself that if I was going to buy myself a new laptop, I would get a Surface Pro 4 because I'm just enamored with how light and the form factor of the Surface Pro I love. But the power aspect is certainly but I can get 16 gig in the Surface Pro 4, right? And I can get the new same Core i7. I can get everything the same. And apparently the Surface Pro 4, the thermal stuff is even better than the Surface Pro 3, so it practically never throttles down based on thermal reasons anymore. So the reason you would want the Surface Book is if you want the GPU acceleration.
I'm over here now.
Okay, so yeah, I can see you there as well.
So is it still high def?
Let me click on it so I can see you full screen on that one. Wow, oh, wow, that looks crazy good.
So this is their built-in thing.
Wow.
CPU is at 38%. And that is the...
Do you think there's any chance that Google Hangouts is in any way GPU accelerated?
Hang on, maybe that's not the right one. What are we looking at? Is this?
Yeah.
I get too many different cameras here.
I'm looking at you staring at me, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's pretty clear.
That looks really good. The frame rate in particular looks a lot better.
What looks better?
The frame rate looks a lot better.
Really?
Maybe it looks smooth. Yeah.
Scott Hunter is pinging me. It's time for my one-on-one.
Oh, this is far more important than that.
1 sec. Back off. On the community stand-up. But yeah, so right there, I'm running Ubuntu. Chrome is at 40% now.
Interesting.
36.8%. The point is not working hard. The fan isn't on.
The fan is not on. So I'm getting messages from other people watching this right now saying Scott's book cam is not showing on the main screen, just your screen. So I can click on it like this.
Oh, well, let me try this.
Can you force
How
it
about
to
that?
me? Right. So now that should show that to everyone. And to me, that frame rate is like 25 frames a second, and your HD, and that lighting adjusts like instantly whenever you don't have a big backlight behind you. Like I can see, yeah, it looks amazing. I can see the studs on every brick.
Yeah,
Right, now they're saying perfect.
I think it's pretty cool.
Wow, okay. Dremel, very good. Okay,
Cool.
that does look good.
It's good. I think it would be interesting to see this versus the Surface Pro. So maybe
Pro
what we
4.
can do is you and I can do. You know what I'll do is I'll do some videos. Maybe we can do is you and me can do a hangout or something, and I'll have the Pro 3, the book, and the X1, and we can compare them all.
We need someone with a Pro 4.
Oh, okay. So the fan just turned on.
Okay.
Because search indexer's going. So right now, Chrome is at 30%, the indexer is at 12%, and its total CPU is 80%, and the fan just turned on.
Like seriously, that's the best picture quality of any device I think we've used.
And it's on. To be clear, there you go. There's lighting.
It's on battery?
It's on battery.
Yeah. Wow.
I've got the dock here as well, which is interesting. The dock is tiny. The dock is. That's the dock.
Yeah.
Which
So
is,
I have to ask you now. What are you going to use your Surface Pro 3 for now that you have a Surface Book?
it's currently holding up the dock. This Surface Book is my work machine.
Right.
So
okay.
This we get machines every X number of years.
Yes.
I've been here now 8 years, and this is my third machine. So every kind of 3 years you get a machine.
Yes, and I got a MacBook Pro for my new work machine earlier this year. So.
Oh, okay. So there you go. The Surface Pro 3 I bought with my own money. So that is my personal computer. So right now I have this work machine.
Yeah.
I have my personal Surface Pro rather, which I'll use for video games, and it's my personal machine. My wife will use it. And then I've got my desktop, which is the giant machine that I built with Jeff Atwood all those years ago.
And I'm the same. I have my giant desktop at home that I built with my own money, and I have my desktop here that's a work machine. This is my old work laptop. This is the X1 from what, 3.5 years ago or something. And then the MacBook is my new work machine, and then I have the Surface Pro 3, which is my personal machine. So all the machines.
Cool. So yeah, it's good.
That does look good. I am really impressed with that camera quality.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna come up to Seattle on Thursday, and we'll hang out and I'll show it to you.
Okay.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Dramatic zoom out.
Hang on. Zoom out.
Am I on?
Your frame. There you go.
There we are. I'm zooming. There it is.
Applause.